Grandpa, I made the impossible shot. 18-year-old's 3-mile sniper kill breaks every record. In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. 18-year-old Rebecca Sterling lined up the most impossible shot in military history, 400 to 800 meters, nearly 3 miles a distance that defied every training manual and shattered every record. But this wasn't just about breaking records. This was about finishing what her grandfather started 80 years ago in World War II, carrying a genetic gift that appears once in 5 million people, and proving that sometimes the most impossible shots come from the heart, not just the scope. Watch how a Montana ranch girl became the deadliest sniper the military has ever seen, and discover the family secret that changed everything. Like and subscribe for more incredible military stories that will leave you speechless. The prairie dog never knew what killed it. 800 yards across the Montana Valley, the small rodent had poked its head above the dirt mound for exactly 2 seconds before Rebecca Sterling's Winchester .70 spoke its single definitive word. The crack echoed across the Sterling family ranch, rolling through coulees and over sage-covered hills that stretched to distant mountains. Rebecca lowered the rifle, her cheek leaving the stock's familiar curve. The old Winchester had belonged to her grandfather, then her father, and now rested in her hands as naturally as breathing. She didn't need to check the target. She knew. "Show off," muttered Connor, her 16-year-old brother, appearing from behind the barn with a bucket of oats for the horses. He had their father's broad shoulders and their mother's practical stubbornness, but he lacked Rebecca's supernatural relationship with distance and trajectory. Rebecca smiled but said nothing. The July sun blazed overhead, promising another rainless day in a summer of drought. The grass crunched brown underfoot. Dust devils spiraled across empty pastures where cattle should have been grazing if they hadn't sold half the herd to pay down debt. "Dad wants to know if you're coming to town," Connor said, his voice carrying undertones Rebecca recognized too well. "Army recruiters at the high school. Graduation was last week, and half the seniors don't have college money or job prospects." Rebecca propped the Winchester against the fence post and studied the hills where her bullet had found its mark. 3,000 acres of rolling Montana landscape, 4 generations of Sterling blood and sweat soaked into soil that was slowly, inexorably slipping through their fingers. "Mom thinks it might be worth hearing what they have to say," Connor added quietly. The idea should have felt wrong, leaving Montana trading these endless skies for military bases in foreign deserts. But as Rebecca shouldered her rifle and followed her brother toward the house, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months possibility. That evening, the Sterling family gathered around the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface, where 3 generations had planned futures and weathered crises. David Sterling spread papers across the wood grain, his calloused hands moving between bank statements and foreclosure notices with practiced resignation. At 47, David had the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life fighting Montana winters and economic realities that didn't care about legacy or tradition. The lumber mill where he worked had cut his hours, cattle prices had collapsed, and the drought showed no signs of breaking. "Numbers don't lie," he said quietly. "We've got maybe 6 months before the bank takes the ranch." Sarah Sterling reached across to squeeze her husband's hand. At 44, she possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from raising children in hard country and making impossible budgets stretch to cover basic necessities. Her auburn hair, streaked with early gray, caught the evening light filtering through kitchen windows. "We'll figure something out," she said, though her voice carried more hope than conviction. "We always do." Rebecca set down her water glass with careful precision. "The Army's offering signing bonuses. The recruiter said exceptional shooters can qualify for specialized programs with enhanced benefits." David looked up sharply. "Rebecca, you're 18 years old. You've never been further from home than Billings. And I can outshoot every hunter in 3 counties." Rebecca replied, meeting her father's gaze steadily. "Grandpa William taught me that skill is currency. Maybe it's time I spent some of mine." The silence stretched, long enough for the grandfather clock in the hallway to chime 9 times. Through the window, the last light painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the pastures, a coyote called to the emerging stars. Finally, Sarah spoke. "What kind of specialized programs?" Rebecca had spent the afternoon researching on her laptop, sitting on the porch swing while ranch work waited. "Sniper training, Army marksmanship units, special operations support." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Programs that come with substantial financial compensation and educational benefits." Connor leaned forward, his eyes bright with something between excitement and worry. You mean like military sniper school? That's serious stuff, Rebecca. I'm a serious shooter, Rebecca replied simply. And serious problems require serious solutions. David pushed back from the table and walked to the window overlooking fields where 4 generations of his family had worked the land. The setting sun cast his shadow long across worn floorboards. Your great-grandfather fought in World War I, he said without turning. Grandpa William served in World War II. I did a tour in the Gulf War. He turned back to face his daughter, his expression unreadable. Military service changes you, Rebecca. Take something, even when it gives something back. Maybe, Rebecca said quietly, but sitting here watching the ranch die slowly is taking something from all of us. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at ceiling beams she'd memorized over 18 years, listening to the house settle around her. Through her window, the Milky Way blazed across the Montana sky with impossible clarity, the kind of darkness and stars you could only find far from cities. At 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and slipped outside. The old storage shed stood at the far edge of the property, a wooden structure her great-grandfather had built in the 1930s. In recent years, it had become a repository for family keepsakes, items too valuable to discard, but not practical enough for the house. The padlock was stiff with disuse, but the key still turned. Inside, moonlight filtered through weathered planks, painting silver stripes across stacked furniture, old trunks, and farm implements that hadn't been used in decades. Dust motes danced in the beams. In the back corner sat an old wooden chest Rebecca recognized as her grandfather's military footlocker. She'd seen it before but had never explored its contents. Tonight something compelled her to kneel beside it. The brass latch was tarnished but opened easily. Inside lay neatly folded uniforms, medals in velvet cases, and a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. But what caught Rebecca's attention was a leather-bound journal wedged against the side of the trunk. She pulled it free, noting how the binding was worn smooth from handling. Opening it, she found page after page of handwritten notes in her grandfather's distinctive script. Diagrams, calculations, ballistic tables that made her breath catch. These weren't simple shooting notes. These were advanced trajectory calculations, wind compensation formulas, and environmental adjustment tables far more sophisticated than anything she'd encountered in her own research. Many referenced shooting positions and techniques she'd never heard of. Despite extensive reading on marksmanship, her eyes widened at the formulas. Calculations for spin drift compensation at ranges beyond 1,500 meters, humidity and density adjustments that weren't standard practice until decades later. Complex trigonometric functions accounting for extreme angles and distances. These were concepts even modern snipers struggled with, yet her grandfather had been working them out by hand in the 1940s. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between pages. It showed a young man in uniform being decorated by a stern-looking officer. The caption read, "Lieutenant William Sterling receives commendation for exceptional service, European Theater 1944. The article mentioned only that Lieutenant Sterling had provided crucial tactical support during a sensitive operation. No specific details, nothing about what he'd actually done to earn the medal pinned to his chest in the photograph. Rebecca continued exploring the trunk. Beneath the journal, she discovered a false bottom. Her pulse quickened as she pried it loose. The folder inside was marked classified in faded red letters. The documents were so old the typewritten text had begun to fade, but she could still read them clearly enough. Lieutenant William Sterling, designated marksman 2nd Ranger Battalion, is credited with the elimination of General Major Wilhelm Richter at a confirmed distance of 1,750 yards. This engagement, conducted on April 12, 1944, represents the longest confirmed sniper elimination in current military records. Rebecca's hands trembled as she continued reading. Due to the sensitive nature of the operation and potential intelligence implications, all details are classified top secret. No public recognition or official record of this achievement is to be maintained in standard military files. She sat back on her heels, dust swirling around her in the half-light. Her grandfather, the gentle, patient man who taught her to shoot prairie dogs and mule deer, who'd spent countless hours with her on the improvised firing range behind the barn, had once used those same skills to eliminate a Nazi general at a distance that shouldn't have been possible with 1940s technology. And no one in the family had ever mentioned it. The small metal box at the bottom of the trunk contained a worn brass compass and a set of dog tags. Engraved on the back of the compass was a simple message in William's handwriting. True aim comes from the heart, not the eye. W.S. Rebecca held the compass, feeling its weight in her palm. The brass was warm despite the cool night air, as if it held some residual heat from the hands that had carried it through European battlefields 80 years ago. But it was the final document that made her blood run cold. A medical report stamped, confidential, detailed, unusual genetic testing. The technical language was difficult to parse, but certain phrases jumped out: abnormal ocular neural processing, enhanced visual spatial cognition, genetic markers consistent with superior depth perception and temporal processing speed. A handwritten note at the bottom, signed by someone with the title Chief Medical Officer, read, "Subject demonstrates abilities consistent with previous cases in the Artemis program. Recommendation: continued monitoring of bloodline for potential recurrence of genetic anomaly." Artemis program, genetic anomaly, monitoring of bloodline. Rebecca read the document 3 times, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Some kind of genetic trait that made her grandfather an exceptional marksman. And what was this Artemis program? Whatever it was, the military had been interested enough to conduct specialized genetic testing, something extraordinarily unusual for a World War II soldier. She carefully returned everything to its place, making sure to position items exactly as she'd found them. But she couldn't resist slipping the compass into her pocket. Something told her she might need its guidance in the days ahead. As she locked the shed and walked back toward the house, Rebecca felt a strange mixture of pride, confusion, and determination. Her decision to pursue military marksmanship no longer seemed like merely a practical solution to her family's financial problems. It felt like she was following a path that had been waiting for her all along, a path her grandfather had walked before her, leaving silent markers for her to find when the time was right. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten as she climbed back into bed. Through her window, she could see the first hint of dawn touching the mountain peaks. In 6 hours, she would drive to town for the Army recruitment meeting. But she already knew what she was going to do. The Fort Harrison qualifying shoot took place on a gray Tuesday morning in early June. Rebecca arrived before dawn to find 23 other candidates already assembling their equipment on the firing line. The group was predominantly male, mostly college-age, with several obvious military brats who carried themselves with inherited confidence. The shooting range stretched across a valley floor with targets positioned at increasing distances: 200, 400, 600, and 800 meters. Mountains rose on either side, their peaks still dusted with late-season snow. The morning air was crisp and thin, carrying the sharp scent of sagebrush and gun oil. Rebecca set up her shooting position, methodically arranging gear with the same careful attention she applied to ranch work. Her rifle was older than most competitors' equipment, the same Winchester 2270 she'd used for hunting, but she'd modified and tuned it until every component performed flawlessly. First time at one of these evaluations. The speaker was a tall woman with expensive equipment and a slight Texas accent. She wore a University of Texas shooting team jacket and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to winning. "Morgan Pierce," the woman continued, extending her hand. "Rebecca Sterling," she replied, adjusting her scope's focus. "And yes, first evaluation." Morgan looked over Rebecca's rifle setup with barely concealed skepticism. "Hunting rifle, huh? Interesting choice. Most of us are using precision target rifles for this kind of work." She gestured to her own setup, a custom-built 308 with a competition scope. "That old 270 won't hold up past 600 meters against match-grade equipment. Most people aren't consistently hitting 800-meter targets with hunting rifles." Rebecca replied pleasantly, continuing her preparations. "But I suppose we'll see how everyone performs." The evaluation began with standard marksmanship tests at 200 meters. Rebecca's shots grouped tightly, her technique drawing attention from the evaluating instructors. Master Sergeant Marcus Hayes, a lean man in his 40s with weathered hands that spoke of decades handling weapons, began timing her target acquisitions and noting her shooting positions. "Sterling," Hayes called out after her 400-meter string. "Your offhand stance? I don't recognize it from standard military training." "Self-taught technique, Sergeant," Rebecca replied. "Hunting in Montana requires adapting to terrain that doesn't always accommodate textbook positions." Hayes made additional notes on his evaluation sheet, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp with interest. The 600-meter target separated the skilled shooters from the merely competent. Rebecca watched Morgan struggle with wind compensation, saw 2 candidates fail to achieve acceptable accuracy, and noticed one shooter actually hit an adjacent target frame entirely. When her turn came, Rebecca settled into a prone position, checked her scope settings, and began her breathing routine. The wind was gusting from the southeast at approximately 12 knots. She made minute adjustments to her hold, accounting for the drift. The first shot struck dead center. The second adjusted for a subtle wind change, hit less than an inch away. The third, fourth, and fifth shots created a group that could be covered with a quarter. "Jesus Christ," muttered one of the other candidates, lowering his spotting scope. "Did she just shoot a sub-MOA group at 600 meters with a hunting rifle?" Master Sergeant Hayes walked over to Rebecca's position, his boots crunching on gravel. He lowered his own spotting scope and studied her for a long moment. "Sterling, where did you learn to read wind at extended range?" "Hunting elk in mountain conditions, Sergeant. Wind changes constantly up there. You learn to read it, or you go home empty-handed." "And where did you learn to compensate for temperature and altitude variables?" Rebecca paused in her rifle cleaning routine and met his gaze directly. "Trial and error, mostly. Some internet research. Lots of practice." She looked up at him. "Is that a problem, Sergeant?" Hayes's expression remained unreadable. "Sterling, what you just did doesn't happen by accident. Sub-minute of angle accuracy at 600 meters requires understanding of ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and rifle mechanics that most people don't develop without formal training." "I had formal training, Sergeant. My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. Montana taught me everything else." Something flickered in Hayes's eyes. Recognition or curiosity. Rebecca couldn't tell which. "Your grandfather was William Sterling." It wasn't a question. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine despite the warming day. "Yes, Sergeant. Did you know him?" "No," Hayes said a beat too quickly, "but I've heard the name." He moved on to the next shooter without further explanation, leaving Rebecca with the unsettling sensation that her grandfather's legacy reached further than dusty documents in a storage shed. The 800-meter challenge was the final test, and it proved beyond most candidates' capabilities. The targets appeared impossibly small through rifle scopes, heat mirage creating visual distortions, and wind conditions requiring complex calculations. Morgan Pierce approached as Rebecca prepared for her string. Some of the earlier condescension had faded from her expression, replaced by grudging respect. "That was unexpected," Morgan admitted, gesturing to Rebecca's previous scores. "Where'd you really learn to shoot like that?" "Family tradition." Rebecca replied, not wanting to elaborate. The compass in her pocket seemed to grow heavier. Morgan nodded slowly. "Well, you've got skills, I'll give you that. But military sniping isn't just about hitting targets on a controlled range. It's about performing under pressure in hostile environments in situations where lives at stake." "I understand that. Do you—" Morgan's tone wasn't challenging now, just serious. "Because I've been training for this my whole life. My father was force recon. My brother's a ranger. This isn't a hobby for me or a way to pay bills. It's my calling." Rebecca shouldered her rifle and looked at the other woman directly. "We all have our reasons, Morgan. Mine are my own." At the 800-meter line, Rebecca settled into position for her final group. Through her scope, the target appeared almost impossibly distant. But distance was just mathematics. Wind was just air moving at measurable speeds. And the rifle in her hands was an extension of her grandfather's hands, which had once made shots that rewrote military history. She fired 5 rounds, taking her time between shots, reading the mirage and feeling the wind against her face. When she finished, she already knew what the target would show. Hayes retrieved it himself, studying the tight cluster of holes before returning to the firing line. His weathered face showed nothing, but when he spoke, his voice carried a note Rebecca had never heard from an instructor. "Sterling, secure your rifle and step back." The other instructors gathered around the target sheet. One of them pulled out a measuring tape. Another pulled out a calculator. They conferred in low voices while candidates waited, tension building. Finally, Hayes approached Rebecca again. "Sterling, your 800-meter group measures 1.8 inches. For perspective, that's not just expert-level shooting. That's beyond anything we typically see from candidates entering advanced programs." He paused. "It's also beyond what that rifle should be capable of producing at this range with factory ammunition." Rebecca waited, sensing there was more. "I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Have you had any prior military training? Any instruction from active duty or retired snipers?" "No, Sergeant. Everything I know about long-range shooting I learned from my grandfather before he died, my father in Montana mountains." Hayes studied her for what felt like a full minute. Around them, the other candidates had finished their strings and were packing equipment, casting curious glances at the conversation. "Wait here," Hayes said finally and walked toward the range control building. 20 minutes later, as Rebecca was loading her equipment into her truck, Hayes returned with another man she didn't recognize. The stranger was perhaps 68 or 70, with silver hair and the erect bearing of a career military officer despite civilian clothes. His eyes were sharp and assessing as they settled on Rebecca. "Miss Sterling," Hayes said, "this is Colonel Thomas Mitchell, U.S. Army retired. He'd like a word with you." Rebecca shook the offered hand, noting the strength still evident in the older man's grip. "Your grandfather and I served together," Mitchell said without preamble. "In Europe, 1944. I was there the day he made a shot that the Army classified for the next 50 years. He paused, letting that sink in. "I made him a promise back then. If anyone in his bloodline showed the same gift, I'd make sure the Army didn't waste it." Rebecca's mind raced. "You knew about what he could do." "I was his spotter on that mission. Watched him eliminate a target at 1750 yards with equipment that had no business making that shot possible. Watched him calculate wind drift and bullet drop in his head faster than I could do it with tables and a slide rule." Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "William talked about you, before he died. Said his granddaughter had the eye. Said if you ever found your way to service, someone needed to make sure you got the right training." "I don't understand. How would he know I—" "Because he saw it in you when you were 8 years old the first time he put a rifle in your hands. Some things run in families, Miss Sterling. Skills, instincts, the ability to see trajectories the way other people see straight lines." Mitchell glanced at Hayes. "Your scores today confirmed what your grandfather suspected. You've got the gift." Hayes cleared his throat. "Sterling Colonel Mitchell sits on an advisory board for special programs. Based on your performance today and his historical knowledge, you're being recommended for immediate entry into advanced selection." "There's more," Mitchell added, "but it's not a conversation for a public range. Can you come to Fort Benning tomorrow?" Rebecca thought of the ranch of her family, of the foreclosure notices on the kitchen table. She thought of her grandfather's compass in her pocket and his journal hidden in a storage shed. She thought of classified documents mentioning genetic anomalies in something called the Artemis program. "Yes," she said, "I can be there tomorrow." The drive to Fort Benning took Rebecca through changing landscapes. Montana's mountains giving way to plains, then to the forests and red clay of the deep south. She drove through the night, stopping only for rain and bad coffee, her mind turning over everything she'd learned in the past 48 hours. She arrived at Fort Benning's gates as dawn broke on her second day of driving. The guard at the entrance checked her ID against a list and waved her through with directions to a building deep in the administrative complex. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Institutional Spartan, with American flags and unit colors on the walls. But the woman waiting behind the desk was not. Colonel Diana Kane was perhaps 45, with silver threading through dark hair, pulled back in a severe bun. Her uniform bore the badges of Special Forces Ranger tabs and other qualifications Rebecca didn't recognize. But it was her eyes that struck Rebecca most, sharp, assessing, and carrying the weight of someone who'd made impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. "Miss Sterling," Kane said, gesturing to a chair, "thank you for coming on short notice. I'm going to dispense with pleasantries and get to the point. What do you know about your grandfather's military service?" Rebecca had expected this question and decided on honesty. "Until 3 days ago, I knew he served in World War II and received some commendations. 3 days ago, I found classified documents indicating he was part of something called the Artemis program and made a shot at 1,750 yards that was classified for decades." Kane nodded as if Rebecca had passed some kind of test. She opened a folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a group of young men in 1940s military uniforms standing in front of a shooting range. In the center stood a younger version of the grandfather Rebecca had known, holding a rifle that looked remarkably similar to the Winchester now secured in her truck. "The Artemis program began in 1943, Kane said. Military scientists had identified a rare genetic variation affecting visual processing, proprioception, and temporal cognition. In layman's terms, people with this genetic marker processed visual information differently, faster, more accurately, with an intuitive understanding of ballistic physics that couldn't be taught." Rebecca stared at the photograph pieces falling into place. "Your grandfather was one of the first identified. The program was named after Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt, known for never missing her target." Kane gestured to the folder. Turn to the next page. Rebecca found a document detailing shooting results from 1944. Her grandfather's name topped the list with a confirmed shot at 750 yards, but someone had handwritten a note in the margin. Actual distance, 750 yards. Security classification ultra. In 1944, with World War II-era equipment, your grandfather eliminated a high-ranking Nazi officer coordinating Atlantic Wall defenses before D-Day. That shot, from a technical perspective, shouldn't have been possible with the technology of the time. Only a handful of people at the highest levels knew the truth. Kane leaned forward. After the war, the Artemis program continued in deep cover. It became particularly active during the Cold War, with operatives deployed for specialized eliminations in locations where conventional military action wasn't possible. Your grandfather was monitored throughout his life, as were his descendants. "You've been watching our family," Rebecca said, her voice tight. Monitoring isn't watching in an intrusive sense. But yes, military research has maintained interest in families with confirmed Artemis markers. When your shooting scores appeared in our database from Fort Harrison, certain algorithms flagged your name for review. Kane pulled out another document, Rebecca's evaluation scores from 2 days ago. The numbers were even more impressive, laid out in official format. "Rebecca, what you did at that range, shooting sub-MOA groups at 800 meters with minimal familiarization, suggests you carry the same genetic advantages as your grandfather. You process visual information differently. You intuitively understand concepts that take others years to master. Your brain calculates ballistic solutions automatically, like breathing." Rebecca thought of all the times she'd known exactly where a bullet would go before pulling the trigger. How she could sense wind direction changes that others couldn't perceive. How distances and angles just made sense to her in ways she couldn't explain. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now you have a choice," Kane replied. "You can proceed with standard advanced sniper training. You'll excel, no doubt, or you can enter a specialized program designed specifically for individuals with your abilities. It's more demanding, more classified, and far more consequential in terms of eventual deployment options." "What's the program called?" Kane smiled slightly. "Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, we still call it Artemis." "How many people like me are there?" "Currently active 7, including you. The genetic marker appears in approximately 1 in 5 million individuals. Most never discover their potential because they never engage in activities that would reveal it. Some become exceptional athletes or surgeons, their abilities channeled into other precision skills. But those who find their way to marksmanship," Kane shook her head with something like wonder, "they change history, usually without anyone knowing." Before Rebecca could respond, the office door opened. Colonel Thomas Mitchell walked in, and Rebecca understood with sudden clarity that this meeting had been carefully orchestrated. "I see you've met Colonel Kane," Mitchell said, taking a seat beside Rebecca. "I wanted to be here when she made you the offer. Wanted you to know you have an advocate who knew your grandfather, who understands what this means." "Did my grandfather know what he was part of?" Rebecca asked. "That he was being studied?" "Initially, no, Boser," Mitchell replied. "The first Artemis participants were identified through exceptional performance and studied without their knowledge. By late 1944, the program became more formalized and participants were informed to a degree. William knew he was part of something special, but I doubt he understood the full scope of the genetic research." "My father, does he carry this marker?" "No," Kane answered. "The genetics are complex. The marker doesn't follow simple hereditary patterns. It can skip generations or emerge unexpectedly in family lines. Your father was tested, standard protocol for descendants of confirmed Artemis operators, but showed no signs of the ability." Rebecca absorbed this, slowly trying to process the implications. "And if I join this program, what exactly am I agreeing to?" "Specialized training far beyond standard sniper school," Kane said. "Deployment for missions of extraordinary strategic importance. Complete secrecy about your abilities and achievements." She hesitated. "In monitoring of your own future children for the marker." The clinical way Kane discussed her potential children sent a chill through Rebecca. "And if I refuse, then you proceed with standard training. You'll still be an exceptional sniper, probably one of the best in conventional forces. The signing bonus and benefits remain the same, but you'll never deploy on missions that truly utilize your full potential." Kane's tone became matter-of-fact. "And frankly, we'd still monitor your children regardless. This ability is too rare and too valuable to ignore." Rebecca stood and walked to the window. Outside, she could see young soldiers conducting morning physical training running in formation while cadence calls kept time. Beyond the immediate buildings, the Georgia pines stretched toward a horizon very different from Montana's mountains. I need time to think, she said finally. 24 hours, Kane replied. That's all I can give you. The next Artemis training cycle begins tomorrow. Basic training starts Monday, whether you're in the specialized program or not. Mitchell stood and joined Rebecca at the window. Your grandfather stood at a similar crossroads in 1943. He chose to use his gift in service of something larger than himself. It cost him in ways I watched him struggle with for 40 years. But he also saved lives and changed history. He turned to look at her. The question isn't whether you have the ability, Rebecca. It's whether you're ready for what comes with it. That evening, Rebecca found herself walking the grounds of Fort Benning. As the sun set, she ended up at a small memorial garden dedicated to fallen soldiers sitting on a bench beneath oak trees draped with Spanish moss. She pulled out her grandfather's compass, feeling its familiar weight. The inscription caught the fading light. True aim comes from the heart, not the eye. Her phone rang. Her father. Hey, kiddo, your mom said you made it to Georgia safely. How'd it go? Rebecca closed her eyes, hearing the concern and love in his voice. Dad, did Grandpa William ever talk to you about what he did in the war? I mean, really talk about it. A long pause. Once, I was about your age, maybe 19, found some papers in his things, and he caught me reading them. He sat me down and told me about a shot he'd made in France. Said it saved a lot of American lives, but cost him something he couldn't quite name. Said he carried the weight of it every day. Another pause. Then he asked me to put the papers back and not mention them to anyone. Said some things were better left in the past. But he trained me, Rebecca said. Spent hours teaching me to shoot. If he wanted it left in the past, why pass it on? I asked him that once years later. He said the skill itself wasn't the burden. It was how you used it. Said if you had the gift, you also had the responsibility to decide what it was for. That was your choice to make, not his to prevent. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I think they want me to do what he did. Follow in his footsteps. Do you want to? She thought about the ranch, about her family's financial struggles, about the restless feeling that had driven her to this moment. But more than that, she thought about her grandfather's journal, his calculations, his classified achievements. She thought about a genetic gift that appeared once in 5 million people. I think I need to, she said quietly. Not because they're asking, because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I could have become. Then you have my blessing, David said, and your grandfather's. He told me once that if you ever found your way to this path, it would be because you were meant for it. Trust yourself, Rebecca. We love you. After the call ended, Rebecca sat in the gathering darkness, watching fireflies emerge among the trees. She thought about impossible shots and classified missions, about carrying weight and changing history, about the moment when purpose and ability aligned. Finally, she stood and walked back toward the administrative building where she knew Colonel Kane would still be working. Her decision was made. The next morning, Rebecca Sterling signed papers that would transform her from Montana ranch girl to something else entirely. The ceremony was brief, bureaucratic, and utterly lacking in drama. But as she put pen to paper, agreeing to join the program that didn't officially exist, she felt the weight of her grandfather's legacy settle onto her shoulders. It felt right. Colonel Mitchell walked her out of the building afterward. Your grandfather would be proud, he said, but he'd also want you to remember something he told me after that shot in 44. He said, Thomas, the hardest part about making impossible shots isn't the distance or the conditions. It's living with them after. Did he regret it? Rebecca asked. Never, but he carried it. That's the difference between soldiers and killers. Soldiers carry the weight. Mitchell handed her a small package. He wanted you to have this when you were ready. I've been holding on to it for 20 years since before he died. Inside the package was a leather notebook, smaller than the journal she'd found in the storage shed, but in the same handwriting. Don't open it yet, Mitchell said. He wrote that you should read it after your first deployment. After you understand what it means to use this gift in the field, the words will mean more then. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Training starts Monday, Mitchell continued. It'll be the hardest thing you have ever done. You'll question whether you made the right choice. You'll want to quit. Don't. I won't. Good, he smiled, because the world needs people like you and your grandfather. People who can make the impossible shots when it matters most. People who carry the weight afterward. Basic training at Fort Benning was designed to break down civilian habits and rebuild recruits as soldiers. For most of Rebecca's fellow trainees, the experience was a brutal introduction to military discipline, physical demands, and mental pressure. For Rebecca, it felt like an intensive course in skills she'd been developing unconsciously for years. The physical training challenged her in new ways. She'd always been fit from ranch work, but military fitness required different muscle groups and endurance patterns. The academic requirements covered topics she'd never studied formally, but understood intuitively: ballistics, weather pattern, recognition, and equipment maintenance. But it was during weapons training that Rebecca truly distinguished herself. "Sterling, step up to the firing line," barked Drill Sergeant Patricia Vega, a compact woman whose intensity made up for what she lacked in height. "Let's see if Montana farm girls can hang with real soldiers." Rebecca approached the firing line carrying the standard M4 carbine, a weapon significantly different from her familiar Winchester, but operating on the same fundamental principles. Around her, fellow recruits struggled with basic marksmanship concepts, fighting their weapons instead of working with them. The target stood at 300 meters, a distance Rebecca considered practically point-blank range. She settled into a stable shooting position, adjusted for the slight crosswind, and began engaging targets with mechanical precision. "Cease fire," Sergeant Vega called after Rebecca had emptied her magazine. "Sterling, secure your rifle and step back." The target retrieval revealed something that made several drill sergeants gather at the scoring table. Rebecca had achieved perfect scores at a distance where many recruits struggled to hit the target at all. "Sterling," Sergeant Vega said, her voice carefully neutral, "have you fired military weapons before?" "No, Sergeant. First time." "Then explain how you just shot expert marksman scores on your first military qualification." Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "Sergeant, the principles are the same regardless of the weapon. Sight alignment, breathing control, trigger pull, and follow-through. The M4 just applies those principles with different specifications." Word of Rebecca's shooting abilities spread quickly through the training battalion. By the end of her first week, instructors from advanced programs were reviewing her scores and requesting additional evaluations. Rebecca found herself caught between the standard recruit training schedule and special assessments designed to measure her potential for specialized programs. "Sterling, you're drawing attention," said Private Lisa Kim, her bunkmate, and one of the few other recruits who seemed genuinely comfortable with military life. Lisa was 20, from California, whose father had served in the Marine Corps. Good attention, but attention nonetheless. "Is that a problem?" Rebecca asked, field stripping her rifle for the third time that evening to ensure perfect cleanliness. "Depends on how you handle it. Some people resent recruits who stand out. Others respect exceptional performance. The trick is proving you're exceptional without making everyone else feel inadequate." Rebecca looked up from her weapon maintenance. "I'm not trying to make anyone feel anything. I'm just doing my best." "I know," Lisa said with a slight smile. "That's what makes it work." The issue came to a head during week 6. The advanced marksmanship evaluation would test capabilities at distances up to 800 meters using precision rifle systems. Rebecca drew a shooting partner, Blake Davidson from Georgia, a military brat with an entitled attitude and obvious resentment of her success. The night before the evaluation, Rebecca was working late in the armory, meticulously cleaning her assigned weapon. The building was nearly empty, most trainees having retired to their quarters for the evening. The metallic smell of gun oil and the rhythmic motion of the cleaning rod brought a sense of calm after the day's intensive drills. The door opened and Blake walked in, his voice carrying false casualness. "Working late, Sterling. Must be nice having everything come so easily. The rest of us are busting our asses while you're breaking records without breaking a sweat." Rebecca didn't look up. "Nothing about this is easy, Blake. I work as hard as anyone else." "Sure you do. That's why you're the drill sergeant's favorite." He leaned closer. "You know what I think? There's something else going on. Nobody gets the kind of attention you're getting without connections." The next morning's evaluation revealed his jealousy had turned to sabotage. As Rebecca prepared for the 800-meter engagement after a grueling 10-mile hike with full gear, she noticed something wasn't right. The scope's adjustment dials felt different, minutely off from where she'd left them. "Something wrong?" asked Bryce Holloway, her assigned spotter for the exercise. At 20, Bryce was from Pennsylvania with an analytical mind and genuine shooting knowledge. "Check my scope," Rebecca whispered. "I think someone's been messing with it." Bryce examined the equipment with narrowed eyes. "The elevation's been altered by half a minute of angle. The windage, too. It's subtle, wouldn't be noticeable unless you were intimately familiar with your setup." "Can we fix it?" "Yes, but we don't have time to recalibrate properly before the exercise starts." Rebecca's jaw tightened. Then I'll compensate manually. When the exercise began, Rebecca found herself making mental adjustments for the tampered scope settings with each shot. Despite the sabotage, she hit every target, though her groups weren't as tight as usual. After completing the course, she reported the tampering to the evaluators. Security footage revealed Blake accessing the equipment locker during unauthorized hours. When confronted, he became defensive. Women don't belong in special operations, he spat during the disciplinary hearing. Especially not teenage girls playing soldier. That teenage girl outshot you with sabotaged equipment? The company commander replied coldly. You're done here, Davidson. Report to the sergeant major for dismissal processing. As Blake was escorted away, he turned to Rebecca with undisguised contempt. You think this is just about me? There are plenty of people who don't want you here. I'm just the one who got caught. The warning proved prophetic. Though Blake was expelled, Rebecca continued to face subtle resistance from some candidates who believed her success came from preferential treatment rather than earned skill. She learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of military training, where excellence could inspire both respect and resentment. The Special Operations Training Course began 2 weeks after basic training graduation. 8 candidates had been selected from hundreds of applicants. Rebecca was the youngest by 3 years and the only woman. The course would combine advanced marksmanship instruction with survival training, tactical planning, and psychological conditioning designed to simulate combat stress. Welcome to the big leagues, said Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes on the first day. At 35, Hayes was from Tennessee with a lean build and the calm competence of someone who'd spent years in hard country. This course has a 70% failure rate. Most of you won't make it through. Those who do will be among the best trained snipers in the world. The first week covered theoretical foundations, ballistic science, weather pattern recognition, and target identification. Rebecca discovered that her intuitive understanding of these concepts gave her a significant advantage, allowing her to focus on military-specific applications, while other candidates struggled with basic principles. The second week introduced practical applications at ranges up to 1,500 meters. Rebecca's performance continued to exceed expectations, though she began to understand the social dynamics that came with consistent excellence. Sterling word of advice, said Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the lead marksmanship instructor, after a particularly impressive shooting session. Excellence can be isolating if you're not careful. Don't let pursuit of perfection interfere with team building. I'm not trying to isolate myself, ma'am, Rebecca replied. I'm just trying to perform to the best of my abilities. I understand that, but remember that military operations are team endeavors. Individual excellence means nothing if it doesn't contribute to collective success. The advice proved essential during the third week's team exercises. Candidates paired for 2-person sniper teams with 1 shooter and 1 spotter working together to engage targets at unknown distances under time pressure. Rebecca was paired with Bryce Holloway, whose analytical approach to environmental factors complemented her instinctive shooting abilities. Their partnership proved remarkably effective, producing consistently exceptional results that began changing Rebecca's relationship with her fellow candidates, transforming her from isolated prodigy to valuable team member. See, Captain Rodriguez observed after their 4th successful team exercise. Excellence shared is excellence multiplied. 3 months into training, Rebecca received orders for deployment to Afghanistan. She would be attached to a team operating from Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khost Province, one of the most active combat zones along the Pakistan border. The deployment came with an unexpected complication. Major Warren Callahan, the FOB commander, had opposed her assignment from the beginning. An 18-year-old with 4 months of training that has no business operating in my area of responsibility. Callahan had told Colonel Kane during a heated video conference that Rebecca wasn't supposed to know about. But Kane had overruled his objections, and now Rebecca found herself on a C-130 transport heading into a war zone where the base commander didn't want her there. The desert heat hit Rebecca like opening a furnace door as she stepped off the plane at Bagram Airfield. Afghanistan in August was a wall of dry heat that made her Montana-accustomed lungs work harder. The air smelled of dust diesel fuel and something else she couldn't identify, but would later learn was the perpetual scent of a country where ancient traditions collided with modern warfare. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes met her at the Arrival Processing Center, his uniform already showing the dust and wear that marked experienced deployed soldiers. Welcome to the sandbox, Sterling, he said, shouldering his pack with practiced efficiency. Transport to Chapman leaves in 30 minutes. Use the time to hydrate and do final gear checks. The helicopter flight to Phoebe B. Chapman took them over terrain that appeared both beautiful and threatening. Jagged mountains rose in every direction, their peaks disappearing into haze, while their slopes showed evidence of centuries of human habitation. Terraced fields, stone villages, and paths that wound between valleys like ancient rivers. Hayes's voice crackled through her headset over the engine noise. Population down there is mostly Pashtun tribal groups. Some support the government, some support the Taliban. Most just want to be left alone to tend their farms and raise their families. Our job is to distinguish between legitimate threats and civilians trying to survive in a war zone. Phoebe Chapman occupied a strategic position providing overwatch for major supply routes and serving as a staging area for operations against Taliban and al-Qaeda forces. The base was perhaps 200 soldiers living in a collection of temporary buildings surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Not exactly Montana, is it? Bryce muttered as they walked through the main gate. He'd arrived 2 days earlier with advance elements. Rebecca surveyed their new environment with analytical eyes. The base was well positioned for defense, but vulnerable to indirect fire from the surrounding mountains. "It'll do," she replied simply. Then she saw Major Warren Callahan standing outside the Tactical Operations Center. His arms crossed as he watched new arrivals process through the gate. At 45, he had the bearing of a man who'd spent his entire adult life in uniform. Rigid posture, close-cropped gray hair, and eyes that missed nothing. Hayes's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's Major Callahan, FOB commander, traditional officer. Keep your head down, do your job, and let your shooting speak for itself." But keeping her head down proved impossible when Callahan summoned her team to his office before they had even unpacked. "Sterling Ande," Callahan said without preamble. "I didn't want you here. I made that clear to Colonel Kane and anyone else who would listen. An 18-year-old with 4 months of training has no business operating in my area of responsibility." Rebecca stood at attention, her face neutral, despite the anger rising in her chest. "But you're here anyway," Callahan continued, "which means you're my responsibility. So understand this, I don't care about your test scores or who pulled strings to get you deployed. In theater, you prove yourself through performance or you get people killed. Those are the only 2 options." He finally looked directly at her. "Don't make me regret that I couldn't stop this assignment." "Yes, sir," Rebecca replied, keeping her voice level. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Callahan raised an eyebrow. "Granted. I didn't ask for special treatment or strings to be pulled. I asked for the opportunity to serve and use my skills where they're needed. If you have concerns about my abilities, I'll be happy to demonstrate them." "Your abilities aren't in question, Specialist. Your maturity and judgment are." Dismissed. Their first mission launched before dawn 3 days later. The team would provide overwatch for a patrol investigating reports of weapons caches in a village called Kurama, located in a valley surrounded by ridgelines that offered excellent fields of fire. "Sterling, your shooting position will be on Hill 472, Hayes explained as they studied the approach route. 780 meters from the village center. Clear sight lines to all major buildings and approaches. Holloway will spot and coordinate with the patrol leader." The approach to Hill 472 required a 3-hour movement through terrain that reminded Rebecca of Montana's mountains, but with crucial differences. The vegetation was sparser, the rock formations more jagged, and the air carried sounds and smells that spoke of human presence in ways that American wilderness never did. Rebecca established her shooting position with methodical care as the eastern sky began to lighten. The customized M110 rifle she'd been issued was significantly more sophisticated than her grandfather's Winchester, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Bryce settled in beside her with a spotting scope. "Range to village center 780 meters, Bryce confirmed after calculations. "Wind southeast at 12 knots, temperature rising, atmospheric conditions stable for now." Through her scope, Rebecca watched the patrol begin their approach. The village appeared peaceful in the early morning light. Children playing, women tending gardens, men working with the livestock. It was difficult to imagine this quiet scene containing weapons caches. "Overwatch, this is Ranger 6, Lieutenant Foster's voice crackled through the radio. "Beginning search of Compound 1, maintain eyes on, and report any suspicious movement." The first indication of trouble came through sounds carrying across the valley. Shouting voices, running footsteps, the distinctive metallic sounds of weapons being prepared. "Movement on the eastern ridgeline," Bryce reported, tension in his voice. "Multiple personnel with weapons approximately 1,200 meters from our position." Rebecca shifted her aim toward the distant ridgeline. Through her scope, she identified 5 figures moving with tactical discipline that suggested military training. They carried AK-47s and what looked like an RPG launcher. Ranger 6, this is Overwatch, Hayes transmitted. Multiple armed personnel moving to positions that could engage your location. Recommend expediting search and preparing for possible contact. Then Rebecca observed one of the figures unlimbering the RPG launcher, kneeling and aiming toward the village where the patrol was conducting their search. Her world narrowed to calculations and breath control. Ranger 6 Overwatch, definite hostile intent confirmed. RPG team preparing to engage your position. Request permission to engage. Through her scope, she could see the man's face, weathered, bearded, perhaps 40 years old. Someone's father, someone's son, a human being who in the next few seconds would try to kill American soldiers. Her grandfather's voice echoed in memory. The hardest shots aren't about distance, Rebecca. They're about the choice to take them. Overwatch permission granted. Foster's voice came back. Engage the RPG team. Range 200 meters. Bryce confirmed. Wind southeast at 15 knots, temperature differential calculated. Target moving toward firing position. Rebecca's breathing slowed, her pulse steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. This wasn't a paper target. This was a human life that would end because of her skill and her choice. But it was also 12 American soldiers who would live because she made this shot. The trigger broke clean. Through her scope, she maintained sight picture. At 200 meters, the bullet took nearly 2 seconds to reach the target. She saw the man stagger, saw the RPG launcher tumble from his hands and roll down the rocky slope. He collapsed. Target down, Bryce confirmed, his voice carrying notes of awe and horror. Direct hit. The others are taking cover. The engagement lasted 20 minutes. Rebecca made 2 more confirmed kills, one at 800 meters, another at 400 meters, while Foster's patrol fought their way out of the village. By the time the shooting stopped, 3 men were dead because of her shots. That evening, Rebecca sat alone in her quarters staring at her hands. Bryce found her there an hour after sunset. Sterling, you okay? Rebecca looked up slowly. I keep seeing their faces, Bryce. The RPG gunner, the one at 800 meters, the one who was trying to flank the patrol. They were trying to kill our soldiers, and I made the right tactical decisions, but they're still dead because I pulled the trigger. Bryce sat down beside her. What you're feeling is normal, Rebecca. It means you understand the significance of what happened today. Does it get easier? No, it doesn't get easier. But you learn to carry the weight without letting it compromise your ability to protect your fellow soldiers. The men you killed today were preparing to kill Americans. You saved lives by taking lives. I know that intellectually, Rebecca said quietly, but knowing something and feeling something are different things. Hayes joined them with coffee. Sterling, I debriefed your actions with Lieutenant Foster and Major Stone. Your shooting today was exceptional and your decisions were tactically sound. Hayes paused, but I'm more interested in how you're processing what happened. It's harder than expected, Rebecca admitted. Training prepares you for the technical aspects, but not for the emotional reality. Good, Hayes said firmly. Soldiers who aren't affected by killing either haven't fully understood what they've done, or they lack the empathy that makes them effective in complex operational environments. Over the following weeks, Rebecca's reputation as an exceptional marksman spread throughout FOB Chapman and beyond. Her confirmed kills mounted, 6, then 10, then 15, each at ranges that exceeded standard doctrine. Intelligence officers began requesting her team for specific missions. Infantry units specifically asked for her Overwatch support. But with recognition came pressure. She overheard conversations in the chow hall during her 7th week. Sterling's getting cocky, 2 months in country, and she thinks she's invincible. The comments stung because Rebecca knew it contained truth. Success had given her confidence that occasionally crossed into arrogance. She'd started taking risks that more experienced soldiers wouldn't consider prudent. The issue crystallized during a mission to eliminate a Taliban commander. Intelligence had located the target in a compound 8 miles from the base. Sterling, I want you to understand something, Hayes said during the briefing, an edge in his voice she'd never heard before. This target has survived 3 previous attempts. He's smart, well-trained, and surrounded by experienced fighters. Overconfidence will get you killed. I understand, Sergeant, Rebecca replied, though her tone suggested she considered the warning unnecessary. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep ridgelines. Rebecca's shooting position would be on a hilltop, 500 meters from the target building. 1,500 meters is challenging even under perfect conditions, Bryce observed. With the wind patterns in that valley, it's going to require precise calculations and perfect timing. I can make the shot, Rebecca said with confidence that concerned her teammates. Hayes interjected. Sterling, the question isn't whether you can make the shot. The question is whether you should attempt it. If you miss or if the shot doesn't immediately neutralize the target, we'll be in a firefight with superior numbers on terrain that favors the enemy. Rebecca studied the mission parameters. The shot was at the extreme edge of her abilities, but she believed it was achievable. Sergeant, I recommend we proceed. I can neutralize the target with a single shot if conditions are optimal. The mission proceeded. After 6 hours of movement through hostile territory, Rebecca established her position and waited. At 1,500 meters, she would be operating at the absolute limits of her equipment and skills. Primary target identified, Bryce announced. Taliban commander exiting the main building. Rebecca's crosshairs found the target. The shot opportunity presented itself suddenly. Target standing in clear sight, wind conditions temporarily stable. The trigger broke clean. The target collapsed. Target down, Bryce reported with relief and awe. Excellent shot, Sterling. But the compound erupted with activity. Fighters scattered, searching for the shooter. Their position was compromised. We need to move now, Hayes said urgently. They know roughly where we are. The extraction became complicated when weather prevented helicopter pickup at the primary landing zone. The team was forced to evade on foot through terrain controlled by enemy forces conducting systematic searches. 2 hours of careful movement brought them to the alternate extraction point. The helicopter finally arrived and they climbed aboard safely. Upon return to Phoebe Chapman, Major Callahan was waiting. Sterling, my office, now. Inside, Callahan closed the door and gestured to a chair. For the first time since her arrival, he invited her to sit. That shot today, he began neutrally, 1,500 meters in variable wind conditions, eliminated a high-value target directly responsible for American casualties. He paused. Exceptional work under challenging conditions. Thank you, sir. But, Callahan continued, Sergeant Hayes reported that you pushed for this mission despite marginal conditions and significant risks. He said you are starting to take chances that concern him. Rebecca met his gaze. With respect, sir, all operations in theater involve risk. I calculated that the shot was achievable and recommended we proceed. And you were right this time. Callahan leaned back. But I've seen this pattern before, Sterling. Young soldiers with exceptional skills start believing they're invincible. They push boundaries until they find the one that pushes back. And in this environment, when boundaries push back, people die. The words hit harder than expected because she recognized their truth. I'm not trying to diminish your achievements, Callahan continued, his voice softening slightly. Your shooting is among the best I've seen in 20 years. But judgment, tactical awareness, and knowing when not to take a shot, those are equally important. I understand, sir. Do you? Callahan pulled out a folder. This came in today from J2. Colonel Kane has a mission, one that makes today's shot look like basic marksmanship. Rebecca opened the folder and felt her breath catch. Satellite imagery showed a compound in mountainous terrain. The briefing summary mentioned Abdul Rahman, mastermind behind 17 bombing attacks across 3 countries. But it was the final detail that made her pulse quicken. Estimated range to target from only viable shooting position, 4,800 meters. Nearly 3 miles, more than double the world record, a distance every military manual said was impossible. Colonel Kane believes you can make this shot, Callahan said quietly. Based on your performance and your special background, she's arriving tomorrow to brief the mission herself. Rebecca stared at these documents. Wind drift over that distance would be measured in meters. Bullet drop would require extreme elevation adjustments. The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation would come into play. Every variable would be magnified to levels she'd never attempted. Sir, this is impossible. By every conventional standard, yes, but Kane seems to think conventional standards don't apply to you. He stood. Get some rest, Sterling. Tomorrow we find out if she's right. That night, while Rebecca broke the seal on her grandfather's leather notebook, the one Colonel Mitchell had given her before deployment. She'd been carrying it for 2 months but had never felt ready to open it. Now facing the impossible mission, she read his words. Rebecca, if you're reading this, you've taken your first life in combat. I'm sorry, not that you did it, but that you have to carry it now. The faces never leave. Learn to carry them as reminders of what your gift costs and why you must be perfect when it matters most. The hardest shots are not about distance. They're about the choice to take them and living with them after. Trust your instincts when conditions align. That's when impossible becomes inevitable. Grandfather William. Rebecca closed the notebook, tears streaming down her face. Tomorrow, Colonel Kane would brief an impossible mission, and she would have to decide if she was ready to attempt what no sniper in history had achieved. The compass grew warm in her hand as she fell into restless sleep. Colonel Diana Kane arrived as the sun climbed over the eastern mountains. She came with intelligence specialists and equipment marked with classifications above Rebecca's clearance level. The briefing room was crowded. Major Callahan sat at the head of the table. Hayes and Bryce flanked Rebecca. Intelligence officers filled remaining seats. But it was the elderly man in civilian clothes who caught Rebecca's attention. Colonel Thomas Mitchell had traveled halfway around the world to be present. Kane activated the wall display. Satellite imagery filled the screen. Mountainous terrain, a compound and a valley, colored overlays indicating ranges and fields of fire. Abdul Rahman, Kane began. 17 confirmed bombing attacks across 3 countries. Orchestrated the Kabul market bombing that killed 43 civilians last month. Currently coordinating a weapons exchange between 3 terrorist cells. She zoomed to show the compound. Intelligence indicates Rahman will be at this location for 72 hours. After that, he disappears across the border into Pakistan, potentially for months or years. This is our window. Callahan leaned forward. What are the assault options? Limited, Kane replied. Conventional approach would be detected miles out. Airstrike risks significant collateral damage, and we can't guarantee Rahman's elimination without visual confirmation. She highlighted a ridgeline. This is the only position with clear line of sight. She paused. Range to target 4782 meters. The room went silent. Callahan's voice was tight. Colonel, that's not an operational plan. That's a prayer. Maximum effective range for the 338 Lapua is approximately 1 to 900 meters. You're asking for more than double that. I'm aware of the specifications, Major, Kane replied. She turned to Rebecca. Specialist Sterling, what do you think? Every eye shifted to her. Rebecca studied the imagery, her mind calculating. The shot would be at the extreme edge of theoretical possibility, perhaps beyond it. Ma'am, wind conditions in that valley would be extraordinarily complex. Temperature differential would significantly affect trajectory. Bullet flight time would be approximately 7 seconds, meaning the target would need to remain stationary. And that's assuming optimal atmospheric conditions. So you're saying it's impossible? Rebecca hesitated. The rational part screamed this exceeded human capability. But another part, the part carrying her grandfather's gift, whispered something different. I'm saying it would require exceptional conditions and calculations beyond standard ballistic models. It's at the edge of what might be achievable. Mitchell spoke for the first time. Her grandfather made a 1750-yard shot in 1944 with equipment that had no business making it possible. The Army classified that for 50 years because it exceeded what anyone believed could be done. He looked at Rebecca. The question isn't whether the shot is impossible by conventional standards. It's whether Rebecca has inherited enough of William's gift to attempt what conventional standards don't account for. Kane pulled out another file displaying a photograph. Rahman with a teenage girl, clearly his daughter. Surveillance from 6 months ago. The girl was 17, attended university in Islamabad when she wasn't visiting her father. Rebecca's stomach tightened. The girl looked like she could have been her classmate. Same age, same energy, just born on the opposite side of a war. Why are you showing me this? Rebecca asked quietly. Because you need to understand what you'd be doing, Kane replied. This isn't just eliminating a terrorist. You'd be taking a daughter's father, creating an orphan, who might grow up hating Americans the way Rahman hates us now. Callahan's expression darkened. Colonel, with respect, is this really necessary? Absolutely necessary, Kane said firmly. Artemis operators don't just make impossible shots. They make impossible choices and live with them. Rebecca needs to decide if she can carry that weight. Rebecca stared at the photograph, seeing herself reflected in the girl's features. But here's the rest of the intelligence. Kane continued displaying new images. Rahman's network traces back to Nazi weapons dealers from World War II. Your grandfather eliminated General Major Richter in 1944, but Richter's logistics officer, Heinrich Volkov, escaped with the trafficking network intact. She showed historical documents alongside modern intelligence. Volkov built that network during the Cold War. Rahman is his protege now, running operations that have killed hundreds across 3 countries. Kane's voice hardened. This isn't just about one terrorist. This is completing the mission your grandfather started 80 years ago. Eliminate Rahman and we break the chain. The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Ma'am, you're asking me to finish what my grandfather couldn't. I'm asking if you're capable of it, tactically, morally, and emotionally. And I'm giving you the choice he never had. You can say no, we'll find another way, though it will likely fail and cost more lives. Mitchell placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. Your grandfather wrote in his journal after the Richter shot, I took one life to save hundreds. The man I killed had family dreams, beliefs he thought righteous. But the men he would have killed also had families. War doesn't offer clean choices, only necessary ones. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the weight of generations. When she opened them, she looked directly at Kane. I'll need time to plan and prepare, and I'll need the most advanced equipment available. But if conditions align optimally, she paused. I believe I can make this shot. Kane nodded. Specialized equipment arrives tonight. You deploy in 48 hours. The mission launched at 400 under a moonless sky. The team consisted of 5 Rebecca Bryce Hayes Callahan, who'd insisted on accompanying despite protocol, and Mitchell, who'd pulled rank to observe. The helicopter insertion took them 15 kilometers from the objective. From there, they would move overland to reach the shooting position before dawn. Hayes took point, his experience guiding them through seemingly impassable terrain. Bryce followed with navigation equipment. Rebecca moved in the middle, the specialized rifle across her back. Callahan and Mitchell brought up the rear. 2 hours into movement, they encountered an obstacle, a small village not marked on maps. Perhaps 20 stone buildings clustered around a central well. Hayes signaled a halt. Pastoral farming community, he whispered. Probably seasonal. Not on our maps because it moves with growing seasons. Can we bypass? Callahan asked. Yes, but it adds 40 minutes. We'd reach the shooting position right at dawn instead of having prep time. Rebecca watched smoke rising from buildings where early risers had lit cooking fires. Through gaps in walls, she could see orange glows and shadows. Mothers preparing breakfast, fathers rising to tend fields, children sleeping peacefully. Her grandfather's journal had mentioned villages in France, civilians caught between armies. He'd written, the eyes of civilians in war zones all carry the same question, are you here to help us or hurt us? The uniform doesn't answer that question as clearly as we'd like to believe. We go around, Rebecca said quietly. These people aren't part of this war. We don't bring it to their doorstep unless absolutely necessary. Hayes nodded. They detoured along a longer road. The 40-minute delay meant minimal prep time, but Rebecca felt the decision was right. The final approach required an ascent of nearly 800 meters through loose scree and sharp rocks. Mitchell struggled with altitude and exertion but refused to remain behind. I watched William make his impossible shot, he gasped. I'll watch you make yours. They reached the ridge line as the eastern sky lightened. The position offered commanding views but was exposed, visible against the skyline with limited cover. Hayes established minimal defensive positions while Bryce unpacked spotting equipment. Rebecca studied the terrain. Hayes, I need higher ground, she said, pointing to a rock outcrop 50 meters above. Better angle, less thermal interference. Hayes frowned. That position is completely exposed. No cover, maximum visibility. I know, but at 800 meters, improved shooting conditions outweigh increased vulnerability. This isn't standard. We need every advantage. Callahan studied the outcrop. Your call specialist. You're the shooter. Higher ground, Rebecca said firmly. We didn't come this far for second best. The team moved to the exposed outcrop. Rebecca felt the weight of the decision. If detected, there would be nowhere to hide. But if the shot failed because she'd chosen an inferior position, she would carry that failure forever. She established her position with meticulous care. The custom rifle felt alien yet perfectly balanced. Bryce sat up beside his. Wind conditions are complex, Rebecca. At least 3 distinct zones between us and the target. Talk me through them. We're dealing with a nightmare scenario, Bryce said, voice tight. Near ridge 12 knots southeast manageable. Mid-valley is 18 knots lateral, with thermal updrafts creating vertical components I can't fully model. Target area shows 8 knots variable shifting every 30 seconds. At this range, we're beyond what calculations can predict. You'll need to feel it more than calculate it. Rebecca absorbed this, visualizing invisible currents. At 800 meters, the bullet would pass through all 3 zones, each pushing differently. Range to compound 782 meters. Elevation difference 340 meters. Temperature at our position 58 degrees Fahrenheit, estimated 72 at target. Barometric pressure 26.8 inches holding steady. Rebecca began scope adjustments, dialing extreme elevation. At this range, the bullet would rise hundreds of feet before arcing down. She would aim at empty sky and trust mathematics and instinct. 2 hours passed in intense observation. Through her scope, Rebecca watched compound activity increase. More vehicles arrived with armed men establishing security. A makeshift bazaar formed. The weapons exchange intelligence had predicted. Still no positive ID of Rahman. Bryce? Rebecca reported frustration in his voice. Rebecca used waiting time to fine-tune calculations running through formulas, visualizing the 7-second flight. She would need to account for wind drift in meters drop in hundreds of feet, Coriolis effect, and dozens of variables most snipers never considered. But underlying the mathematics was the question haunting her since the briefing. Could she pull the trigger, knowing Rahman's daughter would wake fatherless? Could she carry that weight alongside the other faces visiting her dreams? Her grandfather's letter pressed against her chest. True aim comes from the heart. The shot is just the final step. Movement at main building. Bryce's voice sharpened. SUVs arriving, security establishing perimeter. Through her scope, Rebecca watched armed men exit, first scanning professionally. Then a tall figure in traditional clothing emerged, moving with confident command. Positive ID, Bryce said with tension and certainty. Abdul Rahman has exited the building. Repeat primary target confirmed in courtyard. Rebecca's focus narrowed instantly. Through her scope, she found Rahman, tall, bearded, perhaps 45, greeting associates with authority. But then another figure emerged from the SUV, a young woman in traditional dress movements, graceful and confident. Even at 800 meters, Rebecca recognized her from the intelligence photograph. Target has family member present, Rebecca reported, voice steady despite ice forming in her stomach. Teenage girl identified as his daughter. Callahan's voice came quiet but firm. Sterling, that doesn't change mission parameters. Rahman is still the primary target. I understand, sir, but if I miss by even inches at this range. She didn't finish. At 800 meters, margin of error was measured in feet. A miss by 18 inches could hit the girl beside him. Rebecca watched through her scope as Rahman embraced his daughter, the gesture unmistakably paternal. The girl smiled and said something that made her father laugh, then walked toward a vehicle. She was leaving. Target's daughter entering vehicle, Bryce confirmed. Appears to be departing compound. Rebecca's breathing slowed unconsciously as she tracked the vehicle. If the girl left, and if Rahman stood alone, the moral equation simplified. Not easy, never easy, but simpler. The vehicle drove away, dust trailing. Rahman watched it go, standing alone, his hand raised in a final wave his daughter couldn't see. In that moment, Rebecca saw not a terrorist, but a father watching his daughter leave, carrying the same complex mixture of pride and worry and love she'd seen on her own father's face when she'd left Montana. Rebecca, Mitchell's voice came gentle but purposeful. Your grandfather asked himself the same question in Normandy. If Richter had family, if he was a father. And William told me later the answer didn't change the necessity, only the weight. Range to target, Rebecca said quietly, pushing emotion down. 782 meters confirmed. Wind conditions holding as previously reported. Target stationary in center courtyard. Hayes's voice carried command authority. Sterling requesting permission to engage when conditions permit. Before Rebecca could respond, Callahan spoke. Permission granted, specialist. Take the shot when you have it. Rebecca settled into final position, establishing support to minimize movement. Her breathing fell into practiced rhythm. Steady inhale, partial exhale, hold. Through her scope, she watched Rahman moving among associates, occasionally stopping to examine weapons. Each time he stopped, Rebecca assessed conditions. Each time some variable was wrong. Wind gusts, figures crossing sight lines, heat mirage distorting images. Weather shifting, Bryce warned. Barometric pressure dropping, potential front from west. Our window might be closing. Rebecca noted the information but remained focused. Crosshairs held steadily where Rahman moved her mind, calculating adjustments for when the moment arrived. Then unexpectedly, her thoughts turned to Montana. To winter mornings when her grandfather taught her to read wind by watching snow blow across valleys. To patient hours discussing trajectory. To his hand steadying her shoulder during first long-range shots. His voice echoed, "You'll know when it's right, Rebecca. There's a moment when everything aligns. Not just scope and target, but something inside you. Trust that moment." In her scope, Rahman stopped walking. He stood alone in the courtyard center, gesturing to men several meters away. The wind across the valley steadied, all three zones briefly synchronizing in a rare phenomenon. Air between ridgeline and compound cleared, heat mirage settling as temperature stabilized. Rebecca felt it then, not just physical conditions aligning, but clarity of purpose in action transcending conscious calculation. This was why she'd found her grandfather's journal, why she'd joined the military, why she carried the gift appearing once in 5 million people. This was the shot she'd been born to make. "I have convergence," she said quietly. Hayes's response was immediate. Confirmed conditions, all wind zones, synchronized temperature, stable barometric, holding target, stationary. "I have the shot. Engage when ready," Callahan said, and Rebecca heard trust in his voice. She took a final partial exhale and held. Her finger took up trigger slack with practiced smoothness. The world narrowed to crosshairs to target to impossible distance between them. For her grandfather, who'd carried faces for 40 years. For the patrol she'd saved at 200 meters. For the daughter who would grieve but wouldn't grow up planning revenge. For the hundreds who would live because this one man died. The trigger broke clean. Recoil pressed against her shoulder, but Rebecca maintained sight picture, never leaving the target. At 4,800 meters, the bullet would take nearly 7 seconds, an eternity in ballistic terms. 1 second, the bullet climbed hundreds of feet, beginning its arc. 2 seconds, peak trajectory, bullet suspended nearly 1,000 feet above valley floor. 3 seconds, descent, beginning gravity pulling, while wind pushed laterally. 4 seconds, mid-valley crosswind, deflecting path by nearly 2 meters. 5 seconds, continued descent, spin drift adding inches of lateral movement. 6 seconds, final trajectory correction through calmer air near target. 7 seconds. Through her scope, Rebecca saw Abdul Rahman stagger. He remained standing one frozen moment, hand moving to chest. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed to courtyard dust. Men around him scattered, some diving for cover, others rushing toward their fallen leader, all shouting in confusion. "Target down!" Bryce confirmed, voice tight with disbelief. "Direct hit, center mass. Rebecca, you just... Oh my God!" Hayes's voice came professionally controlled. "Confirmed kill. Abdul Rahman neutralized, range 4782 meters. Callahan's response was quieter, almost reverent. "Confirmed. Specialist Sterling has achieved the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history." Rebecca remained in position, eye still, to scope, watching chaos in the distant compound. She felt strangely detached, as if someone else had fired the shot. The enormity hadn't yet registered. Mitchell's voice thick with emotion. "William, you can rest now, old friend." She finished it. "We need to move," Hayes said urgently. "They'll be looking for the shooter. Pack up. 5 minutes to extraction." Rebecca began disassembling, her rifle hands moving automatically. But her mind was elsewhere, processing that she had just eliminated a human being from nearly 3 miles away, completing a mission her grandfather had started before she was born. The descent was rapid, using techniques prioritizing speed over stealth. Behind them, the compound continued erupting. Vehicles departing, fighters mobilizing. No coordinated search pattern yet. "They're confused about shot direction," Bryce reported. "At this range, they won't triangulate easily." As they approached the valley floor, vehicle sounds echoed from the bypass village. Engines grew louder, and Hayes signaled for cover. They pressed into a dry stream bed as 2 pickup trucks passed less than 100 meters away. Armed men scanned terrain, faces tight with anger. Rahman's death had mobilized every fighter in the region. When vehicles passed, they continued toward extraction, a clearing 3 kilometers away. They were 500 meters from the LZ when Bryce raised his fist, gesturing for Hayes to move forward. Rebecca watched them confer, then Hayes waved her and Callahan to observe. Ahead, barely visible among rocks overlooking the planned landing zone, were 3 armed figures establishing an ambush. They had RPGs positioned for clear fields of fire on any helicopter. "They anticipated our extraction," Hayes whispered. "Must have monitored flight patterns from previous ops." Callahan studied the enemy position. "We need to clear them before the helicopter arrives or the bird gets shot down." "Agreed," Hayes said. Bryce circled left to establish overwatch. "Callahan and I approach right. On my signal, simultaneous engagement. Clean, quiet, fast." Rebecca drew her sidearm, a weapon she'd trained with but never used in combat. Her specialty was long range, and this close quarters work was outside her comfort zone. But basic principles remained: sight alignment, breathing, trigger, discipline. The team moved into position with practiced efficiency. Bryce disappeared into rocks on the left. Hayes and Callahan approached from the right. Rebecca held center position, pistol steady, covering approaches. Hayes's hand signal came 3 fingers, 2-1. The engagement was brief. Bryce fired first from elevation, dropping one fighter instantly. Hayes and Callahan engaged simultaneously. The remaining 2 went down before they could respond. Clear, Hayes confirmed. No radio equipment. They couldn't transmit our location, but that was too close. Rotor blades grew audible. Their extraction was approaching. They moved quickly to prepare the LZ, establishing security and popping smoke. As the helicopter settled onto rocky ground, dust swirling in rotor wash, Rebecca felt tension finally fading. They were going home. The mission was complete. Rahman was dead. And Rebecca Sterling had made a shot that would never appear in any record book, but would be studied in classified briefings for decades. The flight back to Phoebe Chapman passed in exhausted silence. Rebecca stared out the window at Afghan landscape passing below. Brown mountains, scattered compounds, occasional wisps of smoke. She had changed the world today. Eliminated a man whose network stretched back 80 years to her grandfather's war. Completed a mission that had waited 3 generations. But she had also taken a life at a distance, so extreme the target never knew death was coming. Had created an orphan who would grieve and question. Had added another face to the collection visiting her dreams. Upon landing, they were escorted to a secure debriefing room where Colonel Kane awaited satisfaction clear in her controlled expression. Preliminary intelligence confirms Abdul Rahman has been eliminated, Kane began. 3 of his top lieutenants were also killed in ensuing chaos as security forces turned on each other, suspecting betrayal. Hayes and Bryce exchanged glances at this unexpected news. The shot had triggered consequences beyond Rahman's death. The shot was historically significant, Kane continued, turning to Rebecca. 782 meters, nearly 3 miles. It exceeds the previous confirmed record by over 2,000 meters. Specialist Sterling, you've accomplished something ballistic science considered impossible. Rebecca met the colonel's gaze. With respect, ma'am, the shot succeeded because of ideal conditions, specialized equipment, and extensive team support. Sergeant Hayes, Specialist Holloway, Major Callahan, and Colonel Mitchell were all essential. Kane nodded. Of course. Which is why all of you will receive commendations. She paused. Classified commendations that will never appear in official records. The details of this operation, including engagement range, are classified at the highest levels. You will not discuss them with anyone. Just like my grandfather's shot, Rebecca said quietly. Kane's expression softened fractionally. Yes, some achievements remain hidden because they're too disruptive to conventional understanding. They raise questions we're not prepared to answer publicly. That evening, as sunset painted the Afghan sky in purples and golds, Rebecca found a quiet corner where she could call her family. Hearing her mother's voice brought unexpected emotion. Rebecca, sweetheart, are you all right? You sound different. I'm fine, Mom. Just tired. It's been a long week. The ranch is doing better, her father reported. The loan restructuring is holding. Connor got accepted to West Point. Full scholarship. Your brother's following in your footsteps. Rebecca smiled despite the weight pressing on her chest. Her decision had saved the ranch and opened doors for her brother. The practical goals had been achieved, but she could never tell them about the real cost, about the shot that would define her career, about the faces she carried, about completing her grandfather's mission. I'm proud of you both, she said, voice thick. Tell Connor the military will challenge everything he thinks he knows about himself, but it's worth it if he keeps his moral compass. After the call ended, Rebecca walked to the perimeter where the fence afforded mountain views. Stars were beginning to emerge, the same stars shining over Montana, though they looked different from this latitude. She pulled out her grandfather's compass, feeling its familiar weight. The inscription caught the last light. True aim comes from the heart, not the eye. I understand now, Grandpa, she whispered. I finally understand. 6 months later, Rebecca returned to Montana on leave, carrying experiences that had transformed her from ranch girl into one of the most accomplished military marksmen in American history. Her record-breaking shot had been confirmed and documented in classified files, establishing new standards that would influence special operations planning for decades. But the achievement would never be publicly acknowledged, never appear in record books, never earn recognition that lesser accomplishments might receive. Standing on familiar hills, Rebecca watched a Montana sunset paint the sky in colors she dreamed about during Afghan deployments. Everything had worked out exactly as planned, except for the weight. Her grandfather had been right about that. The weight would never leave. But neither would the purpose. Rebecca closed her hand around the compass, feeling its inscription pressed against her palm. Tomorrow she would return to Afghanistan. There would be more impossible shots, more hard choices, more faces to carry. But tonight, under Montana stars with her family safe and her grandfather's legacy, honored Rebecca Sterling allowed herself a moment of peace. She had become what she was meant to be.